Again, as per usual, the class is being recorded. I've been recording all my classes. For those of you that have conflicts with stuff and you leave early, come back to the Google Classroom and watch the end of class. Homework is posted on Google Classroom if we have any of it too. But more importantly, especially these first couple of weeks, these in-class activities that we do are important. So if if you leave early, there's no homework, that likely means we did something in class, and you doing that in-class thing out of class should be what your jam is. Does that make sense? It's not a requirement because it's in-class assignment. It's not like I'm writing stuff down sometimes, but it's only going to serve to help you out in the future. So like for today, for example, we ended last week talking about what goes into a great sentence that articulates the main idea or the main thesis of a poem. The first one we looked at, the shawl. For those of you that don't remember, because it was a weekend ago, that sentence needed to have several ideas in it. It wasn't good enough just to say, reading is comforting. What else had to be in that sentence about the shawl? Reading is comforting. What else do we have? Reading is better than what? Knees. Reading is better than knees. And what else? How do you figure out that reading is better than knees? You have to read. We'd rather read and look at the knee, but how do I come to that realization that I'm of the tribe that reads and reading is way better than knees? Knees are temporary. You got that in the headlight or the headlights, but also he was staring at the outside, right? Moment of reflection. So moment of reflection can lead you to come to the realization that reading is better than the pursuits of the flesh. So we read a poem for today. What I want you to do with one other person, because two people today are going to get these donuts. Yeah. This is why I show up to class. People chose another class instead of this for conflict. What I want you to do, read your sentence with one another and pick what you think is the best one. You have 3 minutes to make any final revisions to acknowledge the complexity of what's happening in that poem. What is the title? Introduction to Poetry. Hey, it shouldn't just be, I want students to read poetry, right? That does not acknowledge the fullness of what's happening in that poem. So take 3 to 5 minutes. Make any final edits, pick the best one, prepare to share it with the class. What's going to happen in a little bit, Ben and Dominic, let's pretend like you guys are buddies. You will share your poem. Class, we will pass judgment on whether that's good or bad. And if it's bad, we'll say why it's bad. If it's good, it'll move on to tournament of donuts. A lot of gluten today, up for grabs. All right, 5 minutes. So when the long hand gets on 46, we're going. Ready, set, go. Yep. If you want to do a group of 3, share 2 donuts, that's fine.
It's just what it's about.
Got a shot. I already had it on recording. Don't like that exact tonic. You want the video?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's an orange jersey.
Just keep round back of your head so you can start.
You don't know what it's
Never had startups, so I just feel like that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You can hear like the majority of them. Like,
Just because.
I'm not in yeah. Oh, yeah.
2 more minutes.
Yeah.
Connor. I'm not gonna make any decisions for you. Connor.
How do I word this correctly? Is that correctly?
You could start if you wanted to be a little more positive. Introduction to poetry.
Like,
Advocates for. Alrighty, let's get cracking here. Introduction to poetry. First thing we're gonna do is just kind of go through it stanza by stanza, share some sort of hot takes, and then we'll share your ideas. So remember, when you're analyzing stuff, you're reading stuff, it's a 3-part process. Part 1 is what? Experience. What does experience mean? How you feel towards what you're reading. Are you supposed to be objective when you're experiencing something?
Yes.
No.
Oh, no.
Subjective. No, you bring your personal bias to it. You bring your reactions to it. You try, you cry, you laugh, you hate, whatever. Part 2 is what?
Analysis.
Analysis means what?
Thinking.
Ask questions, you think, you notice details. Mr. Ortega, does the blue door necessarily mean that somebody is sad? Could be. How could it be?
If there's evidence around it.
If there's evidence around it and you are able to impose that meaning upon it, right? Does that mean, though, that you just get to decide that a wastebasket is a metaphor for how society treats intellectual freedom? No, because again, there has to be evidence to support whatever your analysis is. And the last thing is what? An extension means what? For right now, we're just taking extension as applying the lessons from whatever it is you're reading to the real world. Juxtaposing poetry, or juxtaposing the story with what's happening in life. There we go. Intro to poetry. I asked them to take a poem and hold it up to the light like a color slide. All right, so we can assume from the first stanza that the speaker is like what type of person? An author or a teacher, okay? And how does this teacher want kids to experience poetry? Wants to hold it up to light like a color slide and examine it. What does that mean? Somebody give me some analysis here. What did that?
Wants them to enjoy it.
What does it mean to focus on that image specifically of holding a color slide up to the light and examining it? Yeah, you're letting this shine through. You're not trying to beat it to death. You're trying to appreciate it, notice it for what it is. Oh, this is my favorite line. Or press an ear against its hide. Who's hide? The poem's hide. So if the poem is a hive, what does that suggest about the poem?
There's a lot going on.
There's bees in it.
There's, yeah, you can get stung. And if you're allergic to bees, you probably shouldn't read poetry. That's thing one. Obviously, if you didn't get that, shame on you. Okay? Thing two would be what? To think about, be a little bit more careful about noticing the connotations that are attached to something like a hive. A lot of moving parts. So like in a beehive, there's a bunch of things going on that are working together, right, to keep that queen alive. How could a poem be the same way? Absolutely. Mr. Peterson Jr.
On the surface, it doesn't seem like there's much going on, but if you could go deeper into the beehive, then there's a lot
It's complex. There's honeycombs, again, stingers. Also, hives have a certain sound to them, right? If you were to approach a hive, what would you hear? How could a poem be the same way? Poems are sweet like honey. Absolutely. I hope that made it into your sentence. But how can poems have a sound like a hive has a sound?
Kind of emanates ideas, gives you like imagery,
Ab-
you see things.
and literal sound of the words, right? Okay? So hive is a wonderfully appropriate comparison there. I say drop a mouse into a poem and watch him probe his way out. So he's saying, the instructor is saying that he wants the students to do what? Be like what?
Be the mouse.
Be the mouse. Okay, what is he trying to say by comparing students to a mouse in a maze? In terms of how he wants students to examine poetry. Exactly. Do you know the destination? No. You probe and you explore and you figure your way out. Or walk inside a poem's room and feel the walls for its light switch. I only laugh at that because I have a personal experience of being in a room and being confused in like total blackness, having desperately to go to the bathroom, unable to find a light switch, just feeling around everywhere. It was terrible. So I bring that experience to this poem, and that is why I laugh at that line. But anyway, how is any new idea here? Or is this pretty much the same thing as mouse thing?
Explore in the dark.
Yeah, kind of the same thing. You don't. What is the main point of both of those comparisons? In each of the readers exploring, right? You don't have a predetermined destination in mind. You're going with the flow. I want them to water ski across the surface of a poem, waving back at the author's name at the shore.
So don't necessarily for the author.
Yeah.
But for your own.
And how do you get that from that image, Mr. Shader?
Because he's waving at like because if you're in the middle of like, let's say the poem is the lake and you're in the middle of it, and the author's like on the shore, it's like maybe guiding you in a way.
You're like, hey, what's up?
Yeah.
But the author's not driving the boat,
Yeah.
right? And to skim across the surface, how is that different than maybe plunge? Right. So tell me what's the difference between skimming the surface of a poem like water skiing as opposed to snorkeling.
Well, I guess water skiing is kind of the fun aspect and just skimming the surface of it. Make sure to enjoy the poem before you go.
Right. Don't try to constantly be doing this thing that Mr. Lindenberg's asking you to do, about the poem. But all they want to do is tie the poem to a chair with a rope and torture a confession out of it. So he's saying, who is they?
The students.
All right. So what do they want to do? Tie a poem to a chair with a rope and torture a confession out of it? What does that mean?
They're impatient.
Yeah.
They want to find the author like what the poem is intended to mean.
Instead of bringing their own experience to this dog and pony show. What is sort of the difference in imagery between the first 4 images and this one?
The first 4 are upbeat in that one is downbeat.
I mean, not just downbeat, there's actually beating happening. Okay? Torture, would be a prime word to focus in on there. To torture a confession of it. You don't just find a confession, you torture. How can a poem be tortured? Find meaning out of a word. Hive. How else can you torture a poem? You're saying, Mr. Ortega?
Like, just like the reader, like right away, just like only read the first line and then try to find everything about it.
Or they try to bring a thesis to the poem and force that poem to adopt that thesis. One thing that I find, I'll probably tell some of you this as we get into this Dog and Pony show. Sometimes a student will have an idea, and the idea will sound really cool, and it will sound really smart and intelligent. But that idea doesn't necessarily match or reflect what's happening in the work. And yet, because the idea sounds so cool, the student will constantly be trying to bend the poem, bend the story, bend the work to fit that idea instead of modifying their idea. Torturing the poem in an effort to make it fit what they want it to mean, as opposed to exploring the poem and holding the poem up to the light like a color slide. They began beating it with a hose to find out what it really means. Yeah, just delightful torture. So, at the most basic level, what is the complexity that exists in this poem that needs to be reflected in your sentence? What are like the two big ideas?
Poem have many meaning. Student want one meaning.
At the most basic level, Tarzan, that is exactly what has to be. Mr. Brainerd. Right. Okay. So like that duality needs to be in your sentence. And the biggest bugaboo from last week is that some people were making sentences that read too much like summaries of something instead of offering what they perceived the analysis of something to be. So, let's go. We'll start here and we'll just wind our way around. And this should be quick. And what I want the reader to do is just simply read their sentence clearly. Everybody else, you need to either give me a thumb up or a thumb down, elbow extended, on whether or not you think that is an acceptable sentence. We are not doing this to embarrass the readers. We're not doing this activity so that Bethany feels judged after she reads something. I am more concerned with the students giving thumbs up or thumbs down. So as opposed to being concerned about her sentence, I want to see, can Roy figure out what is a good sentence, or does Roy know how to tell the difference between a good sentence and a bad sentence? And if he does, great. And if he doesn't, well, then Mr. Lindenberg has a little bit more work to do related to these sentences to figure it out. Also, again, because we're online, broadcast worldwide, 30 different counties tune into this.
Really?
Please, yeah, a lot of counties. Please make sure to project as well as you can. So, start at that.
While reading poetry, people are often in a rush to discover the meaning of the piece rather than indulging themselves and really taking the time to feel the poem.
Read the first part one more time.
While reading poetry, people are often in a rush to discover
Stop.
the meaning.
There's a word there that makes me want to go thumbs down instead of thumbs up. The rest of it's great.
People.
No.
Rush.
Nope. Nope. Read it one more time.
It's often. While reading poetry, people are often in a rush to discover the
Stop.
meaning.
Discover.
Why is discover a word that might send up some flags?
Different type of word.
How's your day?
What are the students doing in the poem? They're torturing. Are they discovering? No, they're trying to like pull out. And so I would disagree with the word discover. Does that make sense? The rest of it is wonderful. Next group.
Oh, okay. Students spend a majority of time trying to dissect a poem and torture the meaning of it. Therefore, they must see enjoyment and message the text is trying to convey.
Started.
I don't know.
What do you want to do, Shader?
I don't know, just say one.
No, that's good. Yeah. No, read the first part again.
Students spend a majority of time trying to dissect.
So dissect instead of discover. Why is dissect a better word than discover? Yeah, it's more clinical, right? There's not element of wonder to it. So that would be a fine sentence. Next group.
Analysis of a poem should be brought about not by direct textual conclusions, but from the experience and emotions one.
Why do you like that one, Shelburne?
Because it has like.
Well, set a thumb up, everybody. Mr. Nelson, why'd you like that one?
May I hear the sentence?
Analysis of a poem should be brought about not by direct textual conclusions, but from the experience and emotions one entertains when reading poetry.
I like it because it kind of identifies the fact that poems can be individual and unique to each reader.
Yeah, very good. Were you a group of three?
Oh, I was his Connor.
Oh, other group.
Pure understanding of poetry requires diligence as well as willingness, but readers do not have enough patience most of the time.
That one more time?
Pure understanding of poetry requires diligence as well as willingness, but readers do not have enough patience most of the time.
All right, thumbs up or thumbs down? Why are you giving a thumb down, Mr. Blow?
Just in Florida, yes.
Does anybody have a reason beyond didn't float right? Oh, that's a good one. Mr. Getchell, you got a thumb down?
I can read that back. Pure understanding of poetry requires diligence as well as willingness, but readers do not have enough patience most of the time.
You didn't really say anything about willingness. That's what I feel.
You would say that the poem was mostly about the idea of discovery instead of.
Not really.
So why is the word diligence bothering you? So here, and I don't know the answer to this question asking it, so don't think that it's rhetorical. Is escaping a maze as a mouse, does that require diligence? Yeah. Can't just give up. You're gonna have to keep on going, okay? So one more time, give me thumbs up or thumbs down. Ortega, thumb down still. Okay, what's bothering you?
This kind of seems simple to me, just kind of.
Simple is not the enemy of right.
Well, I'm saying it's, yeah, you're right, I got you.
All right, that would be fine. Yes. We're not asking whether it's the greatest or not. We're asking whether it's acceptable or not. That would be an acceptable thesis statement. All right, over here.
Start flows word for word between the poem's lines, so can only be recognized when with beauty and not when with harsh eyes.
Thumb up or thumb down? Probably didn't hear you. Say it one more time. Just make it louder and louder.
The story flows word for word with ease between a poem's lines, but can only be recognized when with beauty and not under harsh eyes.
Yeah, you gotta put thumbs up, people. You gotta know where we're standing with life. All right, good. Bramer and Rojas.
So, the main ideas of Billy Collins' Introduction to Poetry are that of the speaker wanting students to enjoy the poems they read and appreciate the emotions he often makes them feel. But all they want is to find the simple meaning behind it all.
Why do you have thumbs down, Dirkus?
Yeah, I think it's a summary.
Do it one more time, Bramer.
The main ideas of Billy Collins' Introduction to Poetry are that of the speaker wanting his students to
Now
enjoy.
stop right there. You probably think it's a summary because it started like that. Okay, that's not a bad way to start it. Okay, and it's not summary because he's putting up the title of the poem and saying, "Hey, here's what I found in the poem. This poem is expressing this meaning," as opposed to just walking through beat by beat what's happening in the poem. It's a small but significant difference. That is a fine way to start one of these sentences. I would say my objections would be more with some of the specific word choices that Bramer uses throughout the sentence. So see if you can't pick out words that he reads that should be sending up some warning flags in terms of whether or not this is a great sentence.
Alright, So the main ideas in Billy Collins' introduction to poetry are that of the speaker wanting his students to enjoy the poems they read and appreciate the emotions the author makes them feel. But all they want is to find the simple meaning behind it all.
It kind of gets back to, fine, why fine?
This is too kind.
Yeah, it's too kind, because what are they doing? Beating, torturing, deception, right? Yeah. Yes, absolutely that. Middle table.
Yes, okay. The tragedy of poetry, as illustrated in the introduction to poetry, is that rather than explore the unknown, observe the details, and most importantly, just enjoy poetry, readers start with a violent and systematic analyzation of poetry, trying to find the right answer.
Yeah. That's really
I'm gonna get on.
Yeah, wonderful. Moving on. Next one.
You can't do a good one for them, not for you.
While poetry is often carved apart to find the meaning, Billy Collins believes it should be delicately unfolded instead of fried.
Delicately unfolded is a beautiful turn of the phrase. Instead of pride, so you did a good job of getting the oppositions in there. Next table. Those two were very good. Next table.
All right. In Billy Collins' introduction to poetry, he compares how readers attempt to understand the true meaning of a poem with torture, while a poem more closely resembles a hive with many complex parts, which signify the multitude of different interpretations the reader may come to conclude.
Yeah, I don't want to hear it.
Unnecessarily verbose. But fine.
All right.
Next table. Or next group.
Introduction to poetry illustrates through personification that one must not dwell on finding the meaning of a poem, but enjoy the work and let the meaning come to them.
Thumbs? Yes, that is fine. Yes. Is there any other group there or move on? This table.
Because poetry requires patience, they don't get the experience and eye-opening message they introduce.
Say that again?
Because poetry requires patience, many people don't get the experience and eye-opening messages they introduce.
Why are you going downtown, Mr. Darrow?
I think it doesn't bring out the harshness.
Yeah.
Yeah, just
Well-
kind of the downside.
Very good. Next group.
Readers often attempt to interrogate a poem for the author's meaning rather than experience a poem for themselves.
Yep. Fine. Is this two groups or one group?
Wait, you forgot.
Oh, I told.
Pretty short.
You need to be patient and read a poem for your own experience rather than tearing it apart for an explanation.
Why are you go, Hunter? You say yes,
I think it's good, simple, explains what everybody else is talking about.
and Nelson, you go down.
Said like I do. That's what I was.
Yeah.
One, yeah.
Yeah.
That's how you fix it.
Much better. Yes. Second class group.
Reading poetry, people tend to force a meaning out of it when actually they should be solely experiencing the word and adapting their own interpretation.
Yep. Good. Last group.
So poetry is often treated as an overanalyzed part of their poetry is intended to be live and
Ooh. Okay. Yeah. That. Oh, she'll read it again. You're gonna read yours, and then Schmidt, you're gonna read yours. One of you guys is getting donuts. Okay.
So poetry is often treated as an overanalyzed.
Love how you use the word captive, because that very well parallels like the whole torture thing at the end, and then imagination goes. So just wonderful word choice, interesting word choice beyond just kind of like sticking to something that's fine. Very good. And then Schmidt.
The tragedy of poetry, as illustrated by the introduction to poetry, is that rather than explore the unknown, observe the details, and most importantly, just enjoy poetry, readers start with a violent and systematic analyzation of poetry, trying to find the right answer.
All right. Hope one more time.
Right.
So the interesting difference between those two things, both of them are wonderfully worded and borderline poetic, but they have a significant difference in the way in which the sentences are arranged. Can anybody spot the difference? Did anybody hear the difference?
I think Ben's focuses more on the beating,
Yes,
and then hers focuses more on the imagination.
absolutely. And what would you imagination? And what would you say is the intention of this poem? Is it focused more on the beating,
Imagine.
or is it advocating more for the imagination?
To them.
Yeah,
It's not advocating.
All right. I think we're done in about a minute. For tomorrow, we're going to start dealing with pages 18 through 34. Start reading that. You don't need to finish reading that, but start reading that and introducing yourself to those words. We're going to be due for. Yes. Well, you transpose your transplant your.